Okay, I hope I am audible to all the students who are attending this lecture. Okay, we start with introductory microeconomics today. This is the first lecture of introductory microeconomics. Okay, and what we are going to start in this first lecture will be called the market forces of demand and supply. So I repeat, this is the first lecture of introductory microeconomics. Okay, and what we are doing in this first lecture is the market forces of demand and supply. The book which I will be using throughout my lectures on introductory microeconomics, this book is called Gregory Mankiw. So all of you can note down the name of the book, Gregory N. Mankiw. And for revisions and all, I will be giving the students access to the soft copy of this book on the server. Okay, so let's start with the market forces of, let's talk about demand and supply. Okay, students who are attending the online lecture, if you want to write, you can write, but anyways, access to the lecture notes will be given to all the students. Okay, so let's first talk about what is meant by a market. Before digging deeper into what is demand and what is supply, let's talk about what is meant by a market. Okay, so a market is a place where a group of buyers and sellers of a particular good or service exist, and there is a mode of contact between them, either directly or through a middleman. Okay, so when we talk about a market in economics, market does not necessarily mean a physical place where you have to go and buy something. When we talk about market, it is that place where the buyers and the sellers of a particular product are interacting with each other. Now, it can be a physical market, it can also be online market. Now, all of us know these days we buy products through Amazon, we buy products through Myntra. There are a lot of online shopping websites, even those are markets. So students should not think of market as any physical place. Any junction where the buyers and sellers are interacting with each other is called a market. Buyers represent the demand for a product, sellers will represent the supply for the same product. So I hope that is clear to all students. Then moving on to what is meant by competitive market. All students should be familiar with competitive market, also called perfect competition. You have done this in high school. So a market, in which there are infinite number of buyers and sellers. A market in which there are infinite number of buyers and sellers, so that each of them has a negligible impact Each of them has a negligible impact on the market price. All of us know about the competitive market structure. In competitive markets, we have infinite number of buyers and sellers. The price is fixed by the industry. Both the buyers and the sellers take the price as given. And any one particular buyer and seller cannot impact the market price because it is fixed by the industry. The industry is the price setter in competitive markets. Okay, so we can write two characteristics. The first characteristic is all the goods in competitive markets, all the goods in competitive markets are homogeneous. Homogeneous means they are the same, they are identical products. They are same in terms of shape, size, color, okay, weight, etc. So all the goods which are sold in perfectly competitive markets are homogeneous, they are exactly the same. And the second feature is that both the buyers and the sellers, both the buyers and the sellers are price takers. Okay, so both the buyers and the sellers are price takers. Price is fixed by the industry and the buyers and the sellers take the price as given. So I hope students have understood the concept of market. You have also understood that market is not necessarily a physical place. Any place where buyers and sellers interact, maybe online, maybe offline, is called a market. Okay, so right now when I'm giving a lecture to you, this is a market, okay, where I am providing a service. Also, one more thing, market does not necessarily consist of a good. It can also consist of a service. So when someone is providing a service to you, that is also a market. Okay, and then competitive markets, I hope all students have understood. Infinite number of buyers and sellers, they have negligible impact on the market price. They are all price takers. Price is fixed by the industry. They take the price as given, and all the goods sold in competitive markets are homogeneous. Okay, so moving forward now, let's talk about what is meant by demand. So it's all something which you have done in high school, just a quick revision of that. So when we talk about demand, demand for a commodity, demand for a commodity is the quantity of a commodity that the consumer is able and willing to buy. Able and willing to buy at a particular price at a given period of time. So the point to understand here is that when I talk about demand, it captures both the ability to buy plus the willingness to buy. All students should be able to understand this. When I say that I demand a commodity, it means I have the affordability to buy it, I have the money to buy it, and I also want to buy it. I am willing to buy it. Suppose you have the ability to buy a commodity, but you don't want to buy it, then that is not demand. Similarly, you want to buy a commodity, but you don't have the ability to buy it, that is again not demand. When I talk about demand, I should have the affordability to buy the commodity. I should also be willing to buy that commodity. So far it's clear. Talking about law of demand, you will find all this in my lecture notes, which will be uploaded on the online server. Okay. So let's talk about law of demand. So other things, other factors constant, an increase in the price, an increase in the own price of a commodity decreases the quantity demanded for the commodity and vice versa. So other factors, we'll be doing the other factors today itself in the lecture. But when we talk about law of demand, keeping all other factors affecting demand constant, if the price of the own commodity goes up, the commodity becomes more expensive, you will buy less of it. And if any commodity becomes cheaper, if the price of the commodity falls, the consumer will buy more of that commodity. That is what is meant by law of demand. This is pretty much basic, so I'm not discussing too much on this. All students know from high school what is demand schedule. Okay, demand schedule is a tabular representation. It is a tabular representation of the relation between price of a good and quantity demanded. When we talk about demand schedule, it is a tabular representation of the relationship between price and quantity demanded. And when we talk about demand curve, when we talk about demand curve, it is a graphical representation of the relationship. It is a graphical representation of the relationship between price and quantity demand. Okay, so if I can quickly show you a schedule and the corresponding diagram. So price, quantity demanded. Suppose we take the price in rupees, quantity demanded in units. Okay, so when my price falls from 50 to 40 to 30 to 20 to 10, my demand goes up from say 10 to 20 to 30 to 40 to 50. Now, if I plot this, all of this is very easy. Okay, this is quantity demanded, this is price. So price is measured on the y-axis, quantity demanded is measured on the x-axis. Now guys, if I find the slope, what is slope? Change in y by change in x. So I can't find it for the first, but for the second one, change in y is 40 minus 50 divided by 20 minus 10. 40 minus 50 divided by 20 minus 10, which is how much? Minus 1. Similarly, this will be 30 minus 40 divided by 30 minus 20, which is again minus 1. Similarly, guys, you calculate for the other parts, it comes out as minus 1. So you can see, since the slope is a constant, my demand curve is linear. I can say in the above example, since slope is a constant, therefore demand curve is linear. Also, since the slope is negative, demand curve is downward sloping. But let me inform you all, demand curve may not always be linear. Demand curve, it can be a smooth downward sloping curve also. The reason I have drawn a linear demand curve, because the example we have taken, for every 10 rupees fall in price, demand is going up exactly by 10 units. So if we find the slope is coming out to be -1 every time. Now minus denotes the fact that demand curve is downward sloping. As price falls from OP to OP1, demand goes up from OQ to OQ1. And since my slope is a constant throughout, my demand curve is linear. However, let me repeat myself again, demand curve may not always be linear. I have shown you a particular case where it is linear. So hoping students have understood. Now till here, any student has a doubt, you can unmute your mic and ask. Regarding this topic, if any student has a doubt, feel free to unmute your mic and ask. Okay, since no doubts, then I move forward. Okay, so let's talk about individual demand versus market demand. So individual demand represents demand for an individual in particular. Okay, and if I talk about market demand represents demand by all the individuals in the market. Market demand represents demand by all the individuals in the market at a particular point of time, or I can say at a particular price at a particular point of time. Okay, and I can say mathematically market demand is the horizontal summation. Market demand is the horizontal summation of the individual demand schedule. So I can write, therefore, market demand. Suppose there are n consumers in the market. So as I goes on from 1 to n, individual demand by the ith consumer. So market demand, suppose there are n consumers, market demand is summation as I goes on from 1 to n, sum of all the individual demands. I can quickly show you using a schedule. So we have price, okay, quantity demanded by individual A, quantity demanded by individual B. Suppose I am assuming there are only 2 consumers in the market. So 50, 40, 30, 20. this is the demand hypothetically by individual A. This is the demand hypothetically by individual B. How will I find market demand? At a price of 50, you add up the demand. So 10 plus 20. Again, I assume students already know that. It's a quick revision. 20 plus 30 is 50. Similarly, 30 plus 40, which is 70. And 40 plus 50, which is 90. So market demand, assuming only two individuals in the market, A and B, market demand is the horizontal summation of the individual demands, because we are horizontally adding the demands at every price. Okay, moving forward, if I plot it, how will it look like diagrammatically? So this is the origin, x-axis, y-axis. This is quantity demanded. This is price. Suppose this is the demand curve by individual A, and this is the demand curve by individual B. So at the price of OP, individual A demands QA units, individual B demands QB units. So guys, what will be the market demand? So market demand will be QA plus QB. So this will be like this. Also remember, market demand curve will be flatter than the individual demand curve. Now students should know what is meant by steeper and flatter. If a line makes a very higher angle with the x-axis, that line is called steeper. So I'm drawing a diagram here. Suppose I draw this line and I draw this line. So this is my line A, this is my line B. Which line is more steeper? Line A is steeper because it makes a larger angle with the x-axis. Line B is relatively flatter because it makes a smaller angle with the x-axis. So you should know this concept. You can see that the market demand curve is more flatter than the individual demand curves. Another way of saying it, market demand curve is more elastic than the individual demand curves. Although we will be studying about elasticity in the coming lectures, but I thought I should discuss it here also with all the students. When we talk about market demand curve, it is more elastic than the individual demand curves. More elastic means any given change in price will cause more change in market demand, because market demand will include demand by all consumers, not one consumer. So market demand curve will be more elastic than the individual demand curves. Now, some of the students may not be able to understand it if you are from non-economics background, but don't worry. When we have the lectures on elasticity of demand, you will be able to understand even better. But right now, elasticity is to do with more flatter. If the demand curve is more flatter, it has higher elasticity. It is more responsive to change in price. Okay, so I hope students have understood this. Then we can quickly talk about determinants of demand. So our heading now is determinants of demand. Okay, so within this we have first as the own price of a commodity, and all of us know the relationship also. All of us know the relationship. If price of a commodity goes up, keeping other factors constant, quantity demanded falls, and if price falls, quantity demanded goes up. This factor will cause movement along the demand curve. This factor will cause movement along the demand curve. Okay, this particular thing would cause contraction, and a fall in price will cause quantity demanded to rise, which is expansion. Okay, if I draw a diagram quickly to explain you, quantity demanded, price. Suppose I have a linear demand curve, initial price OP, initial quantity demanded OQ. A fall in price will cause an increase in demand. This is called as expansion in demand. Whereas if I take the opposite case, this is my linear demand curve, initial price, initial quantity, a rise in price from OP to OP2 causes the quantity demanded to fall from OQ to OQ2. The upward movement along the same demand curve is called contraction in demand. Expansion in demand and contraction in demand. All students should know that. You will find this in the lecture notes as well. Okay. Second factor which affects the demand for a commodity, income of the consumer. So guys, when we talk about income of the consumer, we can categorize our goods into two types, as you have done in high school if you had economics. Okay, one are called normal goods. So normal goods are those goods for which other things equal, an increase in income of the consumer leads to an increase in the demand for that good. So normal goods have a positive income effect. If your income goes up, you buy more of normal goods. Okay, examples would be TV, LED TV these days, refrigerator, car, etc. All these are normal goods. Okay, when your income goes up, you demand more of them. Then we have something called inferior goods. So I can say, before going on to inferior, I can say an increase in income implies increase in the demand for normal goods, which implies demand curve itself shifts to the right. Now there will not be movement along the demand curve. Now demand curve itself will shift. If your income goes up, at the same price you start demanding more. So if I look at the diagram for this, so I'm erasing the initial part. Let's look at the diagram. So for part 2a, the diagram is as follows. This is x-axis, y-axis, initial demand curve, quantity demanded, price. Now at the same price OP, as your income goes up, you start demanding more of the normal good. So this is my normal good. That means an increase in income will cause the demand for normal good to shift to the right. Now guys, exactly the opposite will happen if your income falls. A fall in income, so I can write it here. Similarly, a fall in income implies fall in the demand for normal goods, which implies the demand curve shifts to the left. Okay, so when your income goes up, demand for normal goods go up, demand curve shifts to the right. And when income falls, demand for normal goods fall and demand curve will shift to the left. Okay, so let's talk about inferior goods now. So within 2, part B, inferior goods. Inferior goods are those goods for which, other things equal, an increase in the income of the consumer causes a fall in demand for that good. So inferior goods have negative income effect. As your income goes up, you demand less of inferior goods. Example would be the very famous examples which you have been doing in your school as well: jowar, bajra, etc., low grade rice. All of these are inferior goods, because when your income goes up, you would want to shift to normal goods. You would not want to buy inferior goods. So I can say an increase in income implies fall in the demand for inferior goods, which implies that the demand curve will shift to the left. And similarly, a fall in income implies increase in the demand for inferior goods, which implies that the demand curve will shift to the right. If your income goes up, you would want to buy more of normal goods, less of inferior goods. So demand for inferior goods will fall, which implies demand curve will shift to the left. And if your income falls, you will reduce the demand for normal goods, but you will increase the demand for inferior goods, which implies that the demand curve for inferior goods will shift to the right. If we quickly draw a diagram for this. So this is x-axis, this is y-axis, origin. This is my demand, D1, price, OP, quantity demanded, OQ. Okay, when your income goes up, demand for inferior goods will fall. Okay, so at the same price, your demand has fallen from OQ to OQ1. Demand curve will shift to the right. This is the case of an increase in income. And case B, fall in income. A fall in income will cause the demand curve for inferior goods to shift to the right. So this is my initial demand. Okay, this is D1. At the same price OP, if income falls, you start demanding more of inferior goods. So in this case, my demand curve for inferior goods is going to shift to the right. So what have you all understood? We have understood that if we talk about income of the consumer, normal goods will carry a positive income effect. Inferior goods will carry a negative income effect. Okay. Then we can talk about the third point which is price of related goods. We can talk about price of related goods. This is the third factor, and within this we have two types. One are called substitutes. Again, you have done this in high school. This is called substitutes. So when are two goods said to be substitutes? Two goods are said to be perfect substitutes if they can be used in place of each other. If they can be used in place of each other to satisfy a want. Example, Coke and Pepsi, they are perfect substitutes. Tea and coffee, they are perfect substitutes. These are some of the examples which you have even done in your high school. So two goods are said to be perfect substitutes if I can use them in place of each other to satisfy my want. Now all of us know, if price of the substitute good, if price of the substitute good goes up, for example, my substitute good is coffee. If price of coffee goes up, demand for coffee will fall, but demand for tea will go up. So I can say demand for own commodity goes up, which implies the demand curve for own commodity shifts to the right. Demand curve for own commodity shifts to the right. And similarly, if the price of the substitute good falls, it implies demand for own commodity will rise. Sorry, demand for own commodity will fall. Example, if price of coffee falls, coffee becomes cheaper, people buy more coffee. As a result, they will demand less of tea. So demand for own commodity, which is tea, will fall, which implies that the demand curve for the own commodity will shift to the left. Diagrams you all can draw yourself now. Very simple. If price of tea, if price of coffee goes up, demand curve for tea will shift to the right, and if price of coffee falls, demand curve of tea will shift to the left. So I can say there is a direct relation between price of substitute good and demand for own commodity. So guys, this is where I stop in the lecture. I request students to leave this meeting and join back again using the same link. I hope you have all have enjoyed the lecture. Any doubt, you can call up or you can mail me your doubts at divineschoolofeconomics@gmail.com. Please join again using the same link. Okay, so this is where I stop.